Nigel Farage, a prominent political figure in the UK, has once again criticized the government, this time targeting Prime Minister Keir Starmer's administration.
Law and order, folks, on our streets is breaking down. This Prime Minister hasn't got an earthly clue how to deal with it.
Farage expresses deep frustration over what he perceives as a significant breakdown in law and order on the streets of the UK. He argues that Prime Minister Starmer is utterly incapable of effectively managing the rising crime and civil unrest that the country is currently facing. Farage's criticism comes at a time when public concerns about the government's ability to maintain control and ensure public safety are growing. These concerns are further fueled by allegations of two-tier policing, where the enforcement of laws appears to differ based on the political or social context of the situation. This suggests that the government and police may be applying the law inconsistently, favoring certain groups or causes over others, which undermines public trust in the fairness and impartiality of law enforcement. Farage's tirade is part of a broader narrative in which he has consistently positioned himself as a defender of traditional values and a critic of what he sees as the weakening of the rule of law under the current administration. His critique taps into the anxieties of many citizens who feel that the government is not doing enough to protect them from rising crime and disorder, and who fear that political considerations are taking precedence over the impartial application of justice. Farage begins by highlighting what he perceives as the Prime Minister's failure to address the escalating violence and disorder that has plagued various communities. Starmer's first speech following recent violent outbreaks was intended to be a robust declaration of action. He announced the establishment of a national capability across police forces to tackle violent disorder, emphasizing the need for a mobile response to these mobile threats. The intention was to project an image of a government taking decisive action, but Farage sees this as a reactionary measure, one that exposes a fundamental lack of foresight and proactive governance. According to Farage, it's as if the government has only just realized that crime and disorder are not confined to city borders and that a national response is needed. This critique from Farage comes with a sharp reminder of Starmer's past actions during similar instances of unrest. Farage points out that during the Black Lives Matter protests, both Starmer and his now Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, were seen taking the knee, an act of solidarity that Farage interprets as pandering to a specific movement rather than addressing the broader issues at play. This, in his view, is indicative of a prime minister who shows more empathy for events abroad, such as the tragic death of George Floyd in the US, than for the violence and crime affecting children and communities in the UK. Farage suggests that this inconsistency undermines Starmer's credibility when dealing with domestic issues, especially those as critical as public safety. Farage intensifies his critique by addressing a recent incident in Birmingham, where a large group of men, some wearing masks and balaclavas, gathered in the city center and reportedly attacked a man in a pub. This group was seen waving Palestinian flags, which complicates the situation as it blends issues of public safety with sensitive political and cultural contexts. Farage views this incident as a pivotal moment for Prime Minister Keir Starmer, highlighting the urgency for a decisive and balanced response. The incident raises serious concerns about the nature of protests and how they can sometimes escalate into broader social unrest. The presence of masked individuals and the violent nature of the incident underscore the potential for protests to turn into dangerous and uncontrollable situations. Farage suggests that this event is not just an isolated case of violence, but a symptom of deeper issues within the UK, where certain grievances and tensions are boiling over into public disorder. For Farage, this situation is a litmus test for Starmer's leadership. He questions whether the Prime Minister will take a firm stand to address the real and growing concerns of the British public, particularly regarding safety and order, or whether he will continue to avoid confronting these issues head-on. Farage implies that the Prime Minister's response, or lack thereof, could signal to the public whether the government is genuinely committed to tackling these problems, or if it is more concerned with maintaining a politically correct stance that avoids addressing uncomfortable truths. In essence, Farage is challenging Starmer to prove that he is capable of leadership that prioritizes the safety and well-being of the British people, even when it requires difficult decisions and actions that might not align with all political or cultural sentiments. This leads to a discussion about the concept of two-tier policing, a term that has gained traction in recent years as critics argue that the police respond differently depending on the political or social nature of the protest. Farage refers to a recent incident where Metropolitan Police Commissioner Mark Rowley was asked about the existence of two-tier policing. The exchange, which saw Rowley visibly frustrated, raises concerns about the professionalism and impartiality of the police force.
Are we going to aim two-tier policing, sir?
Farage draws a parallel between these incident and past events, such as the tearing down of the Colston statue in Bristol, followed by officers, including Starmer, taking the knee in apparent support of the Black Lives Matter movement. Farage argues that these actions give the impression of a government and police force that are not neutral enforcers of the law, but are instead swayed by political considerations. The debate over two-tier policing touches on the broader issue of law enforcement's role in society. Farage suggests that when senior police officers allow their emotions to dictate their actions, it sets a dangerous precedent for the entire force. If those at the top cannot maintain self-control and objectivity, how can frontline officers be expected to do so when faced with volatile situations? This lack of consistency and professionalism, according to Farage, erodes public trust in the police and fuels the perception that the law is not applied equally. Jacob Rees-Mogg, a well-known critic of the current government, contributes to the ongoing debate by emphasizing what he perceives as a significant inconsistency in how public disturbances are managed. Rees-Mogg argues that there is a political bias in the enforcement of law and order, which undermines the credibility and fairness of law enforcement in the UK. His critique is based on the principle that law and order should be applied uniformly, without regard to the political context or the identities of those involved in public disturbances. Rees-Mogg specifically points to the contrasting police responses to different events. During the Bristol riots, for example, the police appeared to stand by as protesters tore down the statue of Edward Colston, a controversial figure due to his ties to the slave trade. This passive response contrasted sharply with the more assertive actions taken by police in other situations, where they were quick to intervene and restore order. Rees-Mogg suggests that this discrepancy reveals a double standard in how law enforcement is conducted, depending on the nature of the protest and the political or social messages being conveyed. He implies that such inconsistencies in policing not only undermine the rule of law, but also erode public trust in the police force. For Rees-Mogg, the integrity of law enforcement is compromised when it is influenced by political considerations, and he calls for a more consistent and impartial application of the law across all contexts. This viewpoint resonates with those who believe that all citizens should be subject to the same legal standards, regardless of the cause they are supporting or opposing. Farage's frustration with the government is shared by many, as evidenced by the broader public reaction to these incidents. Political commentator Matthew Goodwin echoes Farage's sentiments, criticizing the government for what he perceives as a biased focus on far-right activities while neglecting to condemn violence from other groups. Goodwin argues that the government's response appears one-sided, which only serves to exacerbate tensions and deepen divisions within society. He points out that many people are protesting not just against far-right thuggery, but also against issues like illegal migration, the collapse of borders, and the feeling of being betrayed by successive governments on the issue of immigration. Goodwin's analysis delves into the underlying causes of the protests, suggesting that they are a reflection of widespread dissatisfaction with the political elite. He argues that many citizens feel that the government and those in power are disconnected from the everyday concerns of ordinary people. This disconnect has led to a growing sense of frustration and alienation among the public, who feel that their voices are not being heard or represented by the current political establishment. Goodwin contrasts this with his recent experience in Hungary, where he attended a conference. Despite Hungary often being criticized and mocked by elites globally, Goodwin observes that the country appears to be stable, secure, and largely free from the chaos and disorder that seem to be increasingly prevalent in the UK. This comparison serves to highlight his point that the UK's current governance model is failing to provide the sense of stability and security that people are longing for. According to Goodwin, the failure of the UK government to address the real concerns of its citizens has led to a breakdown in social order, contributing to a sense of lawlessness. The lack of effective leadership and the perceived disconnect between the ruling class and the public have created an environment where unrest and dissatisfaction can easily take root and grow. In this context, the protests are not just about specific issues, but are symptomatic of a broader discontent with a political system that many feel no longer serves their needs or protects their interests. This narrative culminates in a stark warning. If the government continues to ignore the underlying causes of unrest, the situation will only deteriorate. Farage, Goodwin, and others believe that the government's focus on far-right activities while downplaying or ignoring other forms of violence is not only unfair but also counterproductive. It creates a sense of injustice among those who feel that their concerns are not being taken seriously, fueling further unrest and division. Farage's critique of the UK government is not just about policy failures, but about a deeper issue of trust and credibility. He argues that the government's inconsistent approach to law and order has eroded public confidence in its ability to protect the nation. This loss of trust is compounded by the perception that the government is more concerned with appeasing certain political movements than with addressing the real issues that affect people's daily lives. In conclusion, Nigel Farage's latest attack on the UK government highlights a growing sense of frustration and disillusionment with the current administration. Farage, along with other critics, sees a government that is reactive rather than proactive, one that has lost its way in dealing with the challenges facing the nation. The issue of two-tier policing, the handling of protests, and the broader question of law and order are all part of a larger narrative about the government's failure to connect with the concerns of ordinary citizens. As the nation grapples with these issues, the question remains, will the government listen and change course, or will it continue on a path that many believe is leading to further instability and division?